Okay, thanks everybody for coming. We're really excited to have Dr. Sukumar here. He's had a chance today to walk around and visit the zoo and see a lot of St. Louis. So just tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about tonight. Sukumar is actually a professor of ecology with the Indian Institute of Science. He obtained his Ph.D. there in 1985 for his pioneering research that he's done with the ecology of interactions between humans and Asian elephants. So obviously that's something near and dear to us here at St. Louis. He continues to work on that ecology, but he also has expanded his research to look at tropical forest ecology, climate change, but his primary conservation interest is still with the sustaining landscapes for elephants and biodiversity. He's contributed extensively to Indian government policy on conservation. He was the chair of the IUCN SSC Asian Elephant Specialist Group from 1997 to 2004. And he is the author of 4 books on Asian elephants, as well as over 120 scientific papers. So actually, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you didn't get a chance on your way in, on the table right outside the door, there are some order forms for one of his books, as well as a brochure on the Asian Nature Conservation Foundation, which is a nonprofit that he's associated with as well. In addition to all of his papers and his books, he's been the recipient of several international and national awards, and he also contributed for over a decade to the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that won a Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. So with that, please help me welcome Dr. Sukumar.
Thank you and very good evening. At the outset, I must thank the St. Louis Zoo for hosting this talk, for inviting me to St. Louis. This is my first visit to the city. I must also thank Linda Reif-Schneider and Heidi Riddle for making this visit possible. And I must say that the 3 days that I have spent towards the end of my 3-week stay in the United States has probably been the best of this particular trip of mine. Just this afternoon, I had a chance to go around the zoo. I spent a couple of hours going around the zoo. I must say I was really impressed with the elephant exhibit, the 10 elephants that you have here, and the manner in which these elephants are being exhibited to the public. I think it's very creative, and I wish that many other zoos would follow this example and learn from St. Louis. So thank you very much. When I mention Asian elephants to people in the West, typically most people think that all Asian elephants are in captivity and that all African elephants are there in the wild. That's not really true because, we do have a fair number of elephants in the wild in Asia. We have approximately 50,000 elephants in the wild and about 15,000 in captivity. So the captive elephants is still a substantial proportion of the Asian elephant population, but we still have 50,000 Asian elephants in the wild. And these elephants are found in South Asia and Southeast Asia. They're found in India, in Sri Lanka, Burma, Bhutan, and Nepal. And Southeast Asia, they are found in Thailand, in Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, as well as Malaysia and Indonesia. But if you actually look at this distribution across South and Southeast Asia, South Asia actually has more than 70% of Asia's elephants. So something like 30,000 plus elephants are actually, more than 35,000 elephants are actually found in South Asia, and the rest are found in Southeast Asia. Now, if you look at why we consider the Asian elephant to be endangered, the comparison always comes with the African elephant. And if you look at the African elephant population, you will find that the African elephant is found in 37 range states or countries, and the population is, probably more than 500,000 in the wild. So it's 10 times the number of elephants that we have in Asia. Therefore, the Asian elephant population is only 1/10. In some sense, it's the poorer cousin among the elephants, but it also receives much less conservation attention compared to the African elephant. One of the reasons is that with the African elephant, you have this big upsurge in poaching, ivory poaching, that hits the media headlines, gets a lot of publicity. On the other hand, the conservation issues with the Asian elephant are rather different. And therefore, that does not get as much media and public attention as does the African species. Now, if you look at the trends in, there are just two or three graphs I'm going to show you. The rest of it is all going to be pictorial. Please bear with me, because very often you may come across statements that elephant populations are on the decline in Asia throughout. Now, this is true with regard to, in a certain sense, the Asian elephant is endangered. It is listed in the IUCN Red Book as an endangered species. But if you actually look at population estimates in the wild over the past 30 odd years that I have been studying elephants, you will actually find that the population numbers are pretty steady. They are not really do not show any kind of a declining trend, if you take the Asian population as a whole. Now, the reason for this is that, yes, there have been declines. There have been quite substantial and steep declines of Asian elephants in Southeast Asia. So, if you go to Vietnam, there are less than 50 elephants left in the wild today. If you go to Cambodia, there are probably less than a few hundred elephants, 300 or 400 elephants. Burma has probably not more than about 3,000 or so. And in Sumatra, Indonesia, again, the elephants have declined. Possibly Malaysia is the only Southeast Asian country where you have a fairly steady population. But Asian elephant populations have declined in Southeast Asia over the last 30 years that I have been observing elephants. On the other hand, so if this is the bad news, there's also the good news. And the good news is that in South Asia, Asian elephant populations have increased. In fact, in the past 30 years that I have been seeing elephants in India, the population numbers have doubled. When I started studying elephants in 1980, we had an estimate of about 15,000 elephants in the wild, across the whole of India. Today, it's certain that we have 30,000 elephants in the wild. In Sri Lanka, again, when I came into the elephant conservation world around 1980, the population estimates were something like 3,000. Today, we know that there are 6,000 elephants in Sri Lanka. So, India and Sri Lanka, in one sense, has bucked the overall trend of declining populations. And I think these two countries offer a lot of hope for the survival of the elephants in the future. And especially southern India and Sri Lanka, I think, offer the best hope for the survival of the Asian elephant, into the future. But to me, the question is, what does the Asian elephant represent? I have considered the Asian elephant as an icon for conservation, because when you're going to try and conserve the vast biodiversity that is out there, it's very difficult to wait until we get an account of every single species of beetle. Even though beetles might be the most numerous in terms of a given taxon. If you take, there are probably hundreds of thousands of, if not maybe few million species of beetles, most of which have not been documented. And it's also not possible to get people excited about conservation of beetles, although a few people might disagree. I mean, they might like insects. But on the other hand, you can use the elephant as an icon because it really excites people. And by looking at the range of the elephant, if you are able to preserve habitat for the elephant, you're also not only going to save the elephant, but also the tiger. It's also a whole host of other endangered species, mammals, maybe birds, and maybe insects like beetles. So to me, the Asian elephant is an excellent icon for broader conservation concerns. At the same time, the Asian elephant is an integral part of the diverse tropical forests. So they play a very major role in the ecology of these tropical forests. Therefore, they keep these ecosystem processes going. Therefore, by saving elephants, we save a host of other smaller species, which might disappear. If the elephants are not there to dig water holes when you have a drought in the dry stream bed, many smaller mammals will not be able to come and get water. If elephants don't disperse the fruits of many tropical trees, those tropical trees will not propagate. If elephants don't uproot trees and break these branches of big trees, many smaller animals will not be able to come and feed on the leaves of these trees during pinch periods. So the elephant is an integral part of the ecology of these diverse tropical forests. And grasslands also, let's not forget, the elephants are also found in dry areas, including grasslands in Asia. But to me, the elephant goes beyond all of that, because the elephant is also have been a part of Asian cultures for several thousand years. And I think it's very important to remember this. I think the dog has probably, I think this is a unique relationship between humans and animal species. Perhaps the dog has been more faithful to humans than has the elephant. Maybe the horse has won more wars for kings and rulers compared to the elephant. Maybe the cow has nourished, helped contribute to nourishing human populations to a far greater extent than elephants have done. But for the sheer contrast and splendor of the elephant-human relationship, I think there's nothing to equal this relationship. And I would say that such a relationship between an animal, a charismatic animal, and humans will never arise in the future. So this is a unique relationship, and this relationship has not arisen in Africa in the same way that it arose in Asia. Now in my talk, I'm not going to get into details of that, but let me give you in the next few minutes just a brief glimpse of this history. And this is a theme I elaborated on in my book, in my latest book, that covers a vast canvas in terms of the cultural history of the elephant in Asia from the ancient times to the present. Well, this is a seal from an archaeological remains of a civilization called the Indus civilization that flourished more than 4,000 years ago and then unexpectedly collapsed. And if you look at this, looks like a horned deity, and you see 4 animals surrounding this deity. There's a hint of sacredness to these animals, and it's the rhinoceros, the buffalo, the tiger, and the elephant. Okay, and this is a seal from something that goes back 2,000 years before present. If you look at another set of archaeological remains from the Indus civilization, you see these small steatite seals. This showing this elephant with what looks like a line draped over its back. It looks like a cloth has been put over its back. Much like tribals do today when they're going to ride an elephant, they put a cloth over the back. They never ride an elephant bareback. So perhaps hinting that the elephant had been tamed by the people of the Indus civilization. And then this terracotta figurine, which is found in Mohenjo-daro, in the northwest part of the subcontinent, if you look very closely at the original, you'll actually see color bands on the forehead of this elephant, not very visible. And even today, you come and look at, there's any festival in which elephants participate, you will actually find these elephants are, colored, gorgeously, or they're caparisoned, and there's a lot of colors, on their forehead. So it provides a hint that these people had known captive elephants during this period. Following the Indus civilization, we had the Vedic period, and in the early Vedic texts, when you read about Indra, the king of the gods, Indra, the king of gods, rides a horse. This is a horse-based culture that came into India from Central Asia. But later on, within 1,000 years or so, you see a transformation. In the later Vedic texts and in the other texts post-Vedic periods, you find that Indra, the king of gods, switches from a horse to an elephant. After all, a horse really cannot compare with an elephant in terms of its splendor. And therefore, this is a hint of a culture, a horse-based culture that then absorbs an elephant-based culture in the subcontinent. You also have the rise of elephant armies in the subcontinent. And this has been a theme that is there for 2,500 or 3,000 years, in which the kings strove to capture hundreds of elephants and keep them in the armies. So the ancient Indian armies consisted of foot soldiers, chariots, cavalry, and elephants. This is shown in a temple sculpture of the Hoysala period. And the earliest use of the elephant in war goes back to the early part of the first millennium BCE. So from the early part of the first millennium BCE until very recent times, the elephant was used in war. Many kings had thousands of elephants in their armies, so elephants were captured in very large numbers. Elephant has been a part of a major religion of Buddhism. Queen Maya, the mother of Siddhartha Gautama, who goes on to become the Buddha, the legend has it that she had a dream that a sacred white elephant carrying a white lotus descended from heaven and entered a womb. And 9 months later, she gives birth to Siddhartha Gautama, a baby boy, who goes on to become the Buddha, the great preacher. And, the Buddha then comes to the earth in several different forms, including that of what we call the Bodhisattva. And in one such form, the Buddha himself comes to the earth in the form of a sacred white elephant and actually offers his tusks in self-sacrifice to a hunter. So even more than 2,000 years ago, these are wonderful tales called the Jataka tales, and one of the Jataka tales talks about this, and this has been depicted in a wonderful painting in the Ajanta caves in Western India during the 4th century. Then we have Ganesha, and Ganesha is, extremely complex for me to be able to do justice. I can do a whole lecture on Ganesha. But Ganesha as an icon arose in Hinduism somewhere around the 4th century. And you see this gradual evolution from very, very simple Ganesha. This is a Cambodian Ganesha, and Ganesha actually spreads from India. The sacred elephant, half man, half elephant, spreads from India, into Sri Lanka. It spreads into Tibet, into China, into Southeast Asia. You find depictions of Ganesha, in as far as Japan. So this is a very complex culture that has existed in Asia, and this elephant-human relationship. But despite this long association of elephants with the economic, military, cultural, and religious life, the elephant continues to be threatened with extinction. And let us look at the reasons why the elephant is considered endangered today. It continues to be threatened with local extinction because of three factors major. These are loss and fragmentation of habitat, poaching for ivory and other products, and elephant-human conflicts. And I'm really in this talk going to focus on the last issue because it's not very well known or recognized that this is a major conservation issue that we have to solve if we have to conserve the Asian elephant. Now, loss and fragmentation of habitat occurs, is an ongoing historical process. Human settlements, India is a country of more than 1 billion people. And this is a very long drawn historical process. During the British period, we are opening up a forest the hill forest for cultivation of coffee and tea. But of course, the elephants moved through these plantations. Post-independence, India developed economically, and we needed power and we needed water for irrigation, and therefore lots of dams and river valleys have been submerged by dams. So this is loss of prime habitat for elephants. In Southeast Asia, in the last 100 years, and especially in the last 30 or 40 years, there has been rapid deforestation of tropical rainforest. Forests that look like this have been converted into open oil palm plantations, especially in Malaysia and Indonesia. And this has meant enormous loss of habitat for elephants. We have mining of iron ore in Central Asia. One global sporting event, the Beijing Olympic Games, created a huge demand for iron ore. And in India, iron ore is mined legally and iron ore is mined illegally. For every ton of legal ore that went out of the country, at least 1 ton of equal weight of illegal iron ore went out of the country. And this is an issue. There's been an enormous scandal in the country of the illegal mining of iron ore across several different states, including the state I come from, Karnataka. And this is an issue that is being in the courts, and a lot of people are being prosecuted and so on and so forth. But this has also meant loss of habitats, especially in central India for elephants. And then 100 years ago, when people put in the pipelines to take water from a dam to a powerhouse, or canals to carry the water from, for irrigation, they just completely forgot that there are elephants here and the elephants need to cross and other wildlife needs to cross. So you have canals like this, you have pipelines like this, huge pipelines, and they cannot, and these fragment the habitat because elephants really cannot move across these forests or these landscapes. And development in China has also meant fragmentation. You have highways in Xishuangbanna. Xishuangbanna is the only part of the country where you have wild elephants in China. And China has not more than about 200 elephants as compared to 30,000 in India. And even here you have these elephants are scattered in small populations. And then you have accidents to elephants by trains, by railway lines. And India is converting from meter gauge to broad gauge with the result that the speed of trains is now increased, the frequency of trains has increased, and you have tragic consequences for elephants. So we face a number of challenges as to how do we develop economically at the same time try to ensure that elephants survive and do not, and how to ensure that habitats do not get fragmented. So what are the kind of engineering solutions that we can make? Can we make bridges for the trains to go or for the elephants to go? Can we make tunnels for the elephants to cross below the railway lines? Can we set up early warning systems so that the engine driver knows that there's movement of elephants along the railway line? So these are some of the challenges that we face. Elephants, studies have shown that elephants need about 1,000 square kilometers. Elephants are long-ranging creatures. Over the course of 1 year, they will move over, a bull or a family group will move over an area of about 1,000 square kilometers. To translate this into square miles that you might be more familiar with, it's about 400 square miles. And if you need to conserve the range of more than one elephant clan, you need to have, maybe 2,000, 3,000 square kilometers of habitat. And that's becoming difficult in many parts of Asia. Therefore, we need to plan at the scale of landscapes, because you may not have a single stretch of forest that has 1,000 or 2,000 square kilometers. And this is an aspect that I will come to later. But we also have poaching for ivory, for meat and other products. Fortunately in India, elephants are not consumed. People consider the elephant sacred, so India and Sri Lanka elephants are not consumed. Therefore, poaching has been restricted to poaching for ivory, for tusks. And only the male Asian elephant carries tusks, and therefore only the males are sought after by the hunters, by the illegal hunters. But on the other hand, if you go to Southeast Asia, in many countries, in Cambodia, or Burma, or Vietnam, and so on, people consume elephant meat. And especially all the wars in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, has meant enormous hunger and hunger for protein. Therefore, people go into the forest and they hunt whatever they can, and the elephant is a mountain of food for them. And therefore, this has been one of the reasons why the elephant has disappeared from Southeast Asia, because you have hunting of elephants and you have illegal captures of elephants in Southeast Asia. Fortunately, in India and Sri Lanka, since the elephant is considered sacred in our cultures, the elephant has not been hunted for meat, and therefore the elephant has survived and the elephant continues to increase in, at least in population size. Now, this has meant something interesting, and that is that at least in parts of, in Northeast India, for instance, many of the male elephants today do not have tusks because the tusks have been selected against. The tusks have been, either through capture or through hunting in the past, and therefore you have increasing numbers of these tuskless males in the population. But they do as good a job as the tuskers in terms of reproduction, and therefore there's no problem, and therefore poaching is not a serious issue for the Sri Lankan elephant, for instance, where you have 95% of the males are tuskless. Therefore, the poaching problem will partly solve itself, because female Asian elephants do not have tusks, and they are not killed. It's only the males that are killed, and many males don't have tusks. Of course, to the purist, you might say that, what's an elephant without its tusks? But at least as a species, the elephant will probably still survive. The third issue is that of elephant-human conflicts. When I began studying elephants in 1980, in the early 1980s, I estimated that 150 people were being killed by wild elephants each year. Today, the number has gone up to more than 450. The elephant population has doubled. The human population has probably again doubled during this period. And the number of people being killed by wild elephants every year has tripled. So this is a very serious conservation issue. There is very high levels of tolerance among farmers, to depredation of crops by wild elephants. Depredation is widespread. Wherever you go, where you have wild elephants and you have agriculture, you have depredation of crops. And scenes like this that you see on the right, paddy fields being trampled by elephants, and millions of dollars of crops are damaged every year across these countries. And scenes like this are pretty common across the range states. Now, not only this, but the people are extremely tolerant, but there is a limit to tolerance. And I think those limits have been reached in recent years. We have to do something to mitigate conflict, to reduce the levels of conflict. And this is what I'm going to speak about in the rest of my talk as to one important issue that can help mitigate conflict, which would mean that more elephants will come into captivity from countries like India and Sri Lanka. Because India and Sri Lanka are saturated with elephants in most of the major habitats. The habitats cannot hold more elephants. And these elephants are now going out of the forests. They're going out of the national parks. They're going into the human domain. They're killing people. They're damaging houses. They are destroying livelihoods of people. And poor farmers, the public will not accept elephants in their midst eventually unless we are able to solve this problem, we are able to mitigate this problem. You have situations like this, an elephant roadblock. So here is an enormous, let me assure you, this is not a captive bull, this is a wild bull elephant without tusks. And he stopped this bus, and he systematically is pulling out all that he can from inside the bus and looking for, foodstuffs in the bags that people keep. Fortunately for the people, this is where the driver sits. In India, the steering wheel is on the right side of the bus. So I hope the bus driver got away. I think he must have gotten away. And the passenger the exit door is on the other side. And you can see all the people are standing behind and waiting to see what's going to happen to. I don't think the elephant did anything to the bus. So after he had his full fill, I think he moved into the jungle and all the people got back into the bus. And but these are the kind of scenes that you actually find. This is a wild bull elephant, and he's in must. You can just see the must fluid from his temporal gland. So these are but even, the tolerance levels of people are so high in India and Sri Lanka that even when an elephant gets killed in the crop fields, here is an elephant that has come and damaged their crops, that probably killed somebody, and one day a farmer takes a wire, connects it to the mains and puts it around his farm, and the elephant makes contact and dies in the process. But people are, they're repentant. They can actually come and put flowers on the elephant and they worship the elephant. So I am convinced that this is the reason why we still have 30,000 elephants in India today. The irony of India is not that we have 1.1 billion people. The irony is that we have 1.1 billion people plus 30,000 wild elephants and 2,000 wild tigers and 20,000 wild leopards. And I think this is the cultural reverence. Okay? And I think it's very important to preserve this cultural ethos, this conservation ethos that people have. Because if you remove this ethos, then an elephant is just like any other animal that can be killed. If you go to Africa and an elephant comes out of a national park, in many countries legally you can go and kill an elephant. You can't do that in India. You can't do that in Sri Lanka. The laws are so strict that even if an elephant were to come into your crop field and damage your crops, you cannot do anything to the elephant. Those are the laws in India. And people accept this. But then eventually we have to find solutions as to how to safeguard the livelihoods and lives of people. And that's the challenge that we are facing. We've also had situations because of adverse climatic event, Corey mentioned that I'm also involved in climate change studies. Yes. And we know that in the future, the frequency of events like El Nino and, fluctuations in monsoon and rainfall and temperatures, climate is going to become erratic in the future. And in the past, when we've had erratic climate, we have had very serious droughts. We've had entire groups or clans of elephants leaving the forest area, leaving the national park, and going into human production landscapes. And then, there's a lot of conflict. And some of these elephants now have taken residence completely in these landscapes, quite away from the national parks and the sanctuaries. And then how do you deal with these situations? So let me give you an example. This is the state of Karnataka I come from. And in Karnataka, you see these green areas. These are the forest areas of, where the elephants are found. Now, about 25 elephants, possibly from these forests, have come into this area near a place called Hassan, into a district called Hassan. Now, these elephants roam over an area of 30,000 hectares. There is no forest here. There are only coffee plantations and paddy fields in this. There's only 1% forest. 99% of this area is paddy field and coffee plantations. But these elephants are extremely happy. They hide, in these coffee plantations during the daytime. And during the night, they go out and raid the paddy and they feed on the jackfruits. And these elephants are making a darn good living. You look at this bull elephant, they are in excellent condition. They're as good as the elephants that you find in the zoos here. You look at this bull elephant. This is again one of the raiding elephants. These pictures were got at, by one of my students. I think she took a fair amount of risk in, in actually going and taking these, because these are elephants that, kill people regularly. But this elephant is in excellent body condition. And this elephant is completely living in the human domain. Now look at this elephant in a national park. This elephant looks very emaciated. Okay, but this is the natural condition inside the national park. Now, these are female elephants that are in Hassan, that are raiding elephants. And look at, how well they are doing. They are in excellent body condition. Look at this female in a national park, in another national park, close by, not very far away. This elephant is not doing very well. So what is actually happening is that the whole issue of why do elephants raid crops is a very complex issue. You have habitat fragmentation, you have habitat degradation, you have habitat loss. All those factors are important. But at the same time, the crops are a lure to the elephants. They are like supermarkets out there, inviting the elephants to come and partake of the goodies. Now, why should these elephants settle for plain bread? And this plain bread is all the hard work they have to do in the forest and going and trying to take all the grasses and the bark and so on and so forth. When they can have, the goodies in the form of ice cream and cake, in the paddy fields and in the coffee plantations where there's a lot of jackfruit being grown. So these elephants that are actually found outside the forest and the national parks, they are actually doing pretty well. So what do you do with these elephants? There's no other option but to capture these elephants and take these elephants away. These elephants are not very, they are not a very large number of elephants. There are relatively small numbers of elephants. And these elephants have to, because they cause a disproportionate amount of the damage and the losses. Out of India's elephant conservation budget, 80% of it goes for conflict mitigation today, just paying compensation to farmers. Giving small amounts of, what might look a very small amount of money, but to a poor farmer, giving a compensation of $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 for somebody who was killed by an elephant, that's a compensation that they get from the government. Small amounts of money, but that's what people get. So 80% of our budget goes towards that. So if you are able to capture a very small percentage of these elephants, you can actually bring down the levels of conflict substantially. But that will mean that we have to accept that elephants will have to be captured and brought into captivity. And that is the problem, which I'll talk about. I'll give you another example. This is an event that took place about 25 years ago when a herd of about 13 elephants, and now there are only 8 left, this is the range of the elephant here in the western part. Now 8 elephants actually dispersed to a different part of the range, where these elephants have excellent habitat. They have 4,000 square kilometers of habitat. They have a huge area. Where you have the national parks and the protected areas in the forests, in 4,000 square kilometers of forest, this is an area the size of Rhode Island, we have 4,000 or 5,000 wild elephants. You have this other area where these elephants have dispersed, and there are only 8 elephants. You would think that these are the happiest elephants in the world. It's one elephant family, it's one bull out there, and he has an entire elephant kingdom of 4,000 square kilometers. So this should be the happiest elephant. They should settle down in this forest and live happily ever, ever after, as the fairy tales tell you. The forest. These elephants are used to the crops. So this is a house of a middle-class Indian who's got a coconut plantation here, and he's probably got some paddy cultivated somewhere else. And these are wild elephants. These wild elephants are right walking through. And there's no other option but to capture these elephants, because these elephants kill people, they trample crops, and so on and so forth. And we are having problems because when we want to have a management plan to go and capture these elephants, there are activists whose heart might be in the right place, but they go to the court and they say that these elephants should not be captured. No elephant should be captured at all. What is the solution that you have to the problem? That's what I would like to know. You have situations like this. These are wild elephants moving along a major road. This is a state highway in India. And these elephants are just moving along the road, and they're looking from one truck to another truck and trying to see if they can get some food from these people. So here are the rangers actually going behind and trying to chase these elephants back into the forest. So these situations have become extremely common today, and I'm actually seeing an increasing trend in this. So the question is now, what should be done to save wild elephants? To save Asian elephants? I would say there's a 2-point program. The first, you need to conserve wild elephants, and you need to plan at the scale of landscapes, sustainable landscapes, sensible landscape level planning. Because you can't have very grand plans where you say that you have huge areas that are completely free of people. That is completely unrealistic in a country like India, where it's a country with a large human population. Second is that if elephants are going to come into captivity, and don't forget there are already 15,000 plus elephants in captivity in Asia, including 3,500 in India. We cannot wish these captive elephants away. And with the success of conservation, the irony of the success of conservation is that more elephants will continue to come into captivity. Therefore, we have to plan for the welfare of elephants. We cannot have a situation where these elephants are not looked after well. We need to plan for the welfare of captive elephants. And this is the message that I want to give you. So what we do is, there are these project elephant reserves, and just to show you in southern India, we're looking at these landscapes. We are mapping the landscapes. We are finding out where the elephants are, how are they distributed, what are the different vegetation types, what are the land use patterns, and how can we then plan for conservation at the landscape. You can already see that this landscape in the north is distinct from this area to the south, and even here there is a break. These elephants are separated from the elephants here. And a lot of our work is focused on one landscape which has 8,000 elephants in southern India, and this is a satellite picture of that. You will see here that there are many areas. The dark green is where the elephants are found, but there's also a lot of settlement and cultivation, and the brown is coffee plantation here. So how do we allow the elephants to go through narrow passages or corridors? Now, in some of these corridors are not only very narrow, but they're also human settlements. And people have been cultivating, and people have been staying there for a very long time. Can you just ask the people to go from there? You have to strengthen corridors in a socially acceptable manner. India is a democracy. You can't have sort of utopian ideals of saying, let's move tens of thousands of people out of these areas because these areas have to be reclaimed back for elephants. No, this is what some of the people are actually saying, that you need to relocate 50,000 people from this area. This is complete utter nonsense. What you need to do is, you need to repair the fabric in such a manner that we ensure that the elephants are able to move through, they're able to use these corridors, there is gene flow across the landscape. Our conservation objectives are based on good science, and those objectives are fulfilled. And we have to do this in a socially responsible manner because India is a democratic country. You have to protect, have to look at human rights. And you have to do things in a manner that is acceptable to local people. So what we have, for instance, done is that in one of these corridors, that is in this given area where you have these coffee plantations, and the extreme south, there is this very narrow passage, which I identified many years ago as a very important corridor. We have been looking at different corridors and trying to strengthen this with support from the government, with support from other donors. One corridor with support from Antwerp Zoo that we did, in which we actually went out to the people, had a dialogue with them. And when you have a corridor, it's like a bottleneck. It's like if you're moving from this hall into the zoo, you have to go through that corridor outside. And that's where all the elephants are moving through. And these elephants are moving through these corridors, and people are suffering because they are damaging the crops and they are, killing people. Therefore, people are extremely happy when you tell them that we want to buy your land, or we'll buy land for you outside the forest area, outside the corridor area. And if you have a house here, we'll build another house for you. So this is what we have done successfully in some of these corridors. At least we are trying to develop models to show that you can strengthen corridors in a socially responsible manner. So some people opt to sell their land. It's a one-on-one transaction. There's a market rate. Agree, I buy your land. You have a house or you have a piece of land, I buy it. And then I turn it over to the government. The other thing that we do is we offer them land outside. So if you want land outside the corridor, we buy land for you and we build a house for you. So the people who lived in small huts like this, they now get a house which is much better than what they stayed in. And we are doing this in partnership with an Indian partner called Wildlife Trust of India. And some of the land that we have purchased here came with support from the Antwerp Zoo in Europe. And after the land acquisition, you see that the land is fallow now, and eventually it starts, the forest growth starts taking place in this land, in these wilds. But we don't necessarily want that to happen, because these are natural grasslands that people had been cultivating. So we have to see how to maintain this in the form of grasslands. And eventually the elephants and other creatures start coming and start occupying. This is actually the corridor which says elephant corridor. This is a board that says elephant corridor. And you actually have wild elephants that are moving into this area. So it is possible, but surgically, very carefully, in a socially responsible manner, you have to do it selectively. Not have grand plans and say that, let thousands of people get out from this area, move them all out to the corridors or whatever it is. That's impossible in India and impossible goal to achieve. In terms of mitigating wildlife elephant-human conflicts, what the government presently is doing is that if they put most of their money into ditches like this, trenches, what they call elephant-proof trenches, and into electric fences. Elephant-proof trenches, yes. When you have the monsoon, the mud can get into the soil, And elephants are, I can tell you, amazing in terms of their agility, You'll actually see these elephants actually sliding into this trench, into the ditch, and then coming out and, walking across onto the other side. So we don't actually recommend trenches in high rainfall areas. We have been trying to tell the government that, your policy should not be, Yes, dry areas, yes, it can work, but not in moist areas, in wet areas. Electric fencing has been used quite successfully, but the maintenance is very crucial. The tuskers learned that tusks are non-conductors, and they come and they can tinker with these insulators and they can break the wire. What about the tuskless males? These learn that the soles of the feet are poor conductors. So you'll get these tuskless males that come up to a fence and rear up on their hind legs and put their front legs on the wire and press the wire down and break the wire. What about the female elephants? They are smart too. They just walk along the fence. They locate a suitable tree and they push the tree over the fence. So these are major challenges that we face, really major challenges to keep the elephants away from the crop fields. I think the time has come for capture of elephants. Capture, I'm not saying this in a light-hearted manner, I'm saying this in a very serious manner. That I'm not talking about the manner in which elephants were captured in the hundreds and thousands in the past, but very selectively to mitigate conflict. I'm not talking about captures of hundreds of elephants were used in the armies of the kings and the rulers, not in that manner, but selectively elephants that are killing people, bulls that are killing people, small herds of elephants that have come out of the forest and that have no real home outside. We have to capture them. This is a wonderful painting of a kedda, and kedda is when the elephants used to be driven into the stockades and so on and so forth. Which means that if more elephants are going to come into captivity, we need to attend to the welfare and management of captive elephants. And captive elephants, arouse a lot of emotions among people. Elephant is a highly sensitive animal. It's a very intelligent animal. It's high levels of cognition. Do we have a right to restrain this freedom of elephants? But what's the other option? How do you also provide relief to people? Should these elephants die? Because otherwise, somebody is going to kill these elephants. if the elephant gets beyond the tolerance levels of causing damage to crops and to the lives of people. What do we really do? You have elephants in zoos, and I know the big debate. I've been coming to zoos for almost 20 years now, although there's been a break of a few years, and I've seen the changes that are taking place. You know, that a lot of zoos have put a lot of thought into how do they keep elephants, how do they manage the elephants, the whole free contact to the protected contact. I'm seeing all these changes that are taking place for the good of the elephant. That's the general trend that I'm seeing. And therefore, elephants are in captivity. There may be conditions in zoos. In India, somebody has built a house and you have an elephant coming up and blessing the family. So this is the kind of situation that you get when people keep elephants, and there are people who own elephants. Elephants take tourists on rides inside wildlife sanctuaries, or this is in a fort in Jaipur. Elephants are taking tourists up the hill to a fort. This is potentially a very eco-friendly way of transportation rather than using vehicles. But then we have to make sure that these elephants are well looked after. The welfare of these elephants are well looked after, and that's the challenge that we have. We have elephants in circuses, and we have controversies over the use of elephants in circuses in India. We have temple elephants. Now, elephants in temples, this reinforces the connotation of the sacred white elephant. Now, the question is, if there are no elephants in temples, and many of these elephants in temples are not kept very well. They're either solitary, like what you have in some temples, or you have the picture I showed you earlier about very large number of elephants kept in a temple in Kerala, where you have 60 or 70 all male elephants. So we have to reinvent the role of these elephants in captivity. How do we use these elephants? How do we manage these elephants? How do we train these elephants? Elephants are giving, they hear an auto rickshaw driver, it's like a little taxi, mini taxi, that he's getting a blessing from an elephant. Elephants were used in logging in the past in Burma, in Thailand, in India. And India and Thailand have banned logging now because of deforestation and because of floods. And then you had the phenomena of the street elephants of Bangkok. Elephants were out of work and they were coming and begging on the streets of Bangkok. We also have problems with our elephants, probably much more so in Asian situations compared to Western facilities. This elephant has not been chained properly. The elephant is very much injured. And this has given the captive elephant a very bad name. The elephants are chained with. So how can we improve this? Rather than simply say that there should be no elephants in captivity, which I feel is unrealistic at this stage. Here an elephant is being trained. There are good traditions and there are bad traditions of training. What are the best methods of training elephants? The most humane and the most acceptable way of training an elephant. Certainly not tying it to a tree and poking it with spears or poles or whatever that this is doing. This is what has given captive elephants a bad name. So we have to look at tradition. We have to look at the good traditions. We have to look at tradition in the East. We have to see what are the best practices in the West. And we have to come together to try and see whether we can come up with new guidelines, with a new framework for managing elephants in captivity. Elephants in temples are not looked after well. They are thought of as a cash cow today, and they are made to work for 100 days in the year, participating in festivals and standing in the hot sun. This is not very good, and they run amok when they come into mass, and they kill people sometimes. The forest camp elephants. For some of you here in the audience, I know you have been to Asia, you've been to forest camps in Burma and India and so on. These are the best situations where these elephants are. They have the best record of health, of fecundity, number of births of calves, of longevity and so on. The elephants that I know that have lived in these forest camps for more than 75 years. And, these elephants have access to natural habitat. And, there's a very close bonding between the elephant keepers and the elephant. Now, this is a very special bond that has been there for centuries. There are traditional elephant keeping families, communities, tribals, who pass on their skills to their sons. But that art is dying out today. That art is dying out because elephants are not being captured systematically in the country in the last 30 or 40 years. This is going to pose a problem today because those old skills that the mahouts had, it's disappearing in the country, even in India. Probably in Burma it's still there, but in India it's disappearing. And therefore, when you have a management situation, a conflict situation, when you have to go and capture elephants, the skill sets, I can tell you, are far diminished today compared to what you had 30 or 40 years ago. Elephants are part of the mahouts family. There is this very close bonding, and we need to have an appreciation of this aspect of the elephant-human relationship also. It is not just that they live among the mahouts and so on. Even a little boy, the mahout's son, just can come and scrub an elephant, and the elephant gladly accepts this. It's a very different kind of a situation in Asia. And that's something that we need to keep in mind when we say that all elephants, all captive elephants, that we wish away all captive elephants, which is completely unrealistic. So the question I'm asking here is, can West and East meet on elephants? I know the situation is different. Most of the zoos are moving to what they call a protected contact. You have this iron bar here that keeps the elephant keeper away from the elephant, or the elephant away from the keeper. But here, it's still free contact. And that's how it's going to continue to be in Asia. And therefore, these are very different systems. And I'm not here to tell you how to manage your elephants. Now, this is a debate, this is a discussion that you have had among yourselves, and what's best, the most comfortable manner in which you have to manage elephants, you have to do that. As long as the welfare of the elephant is taken care of, that's paramount. I would make a humble plea for a dialogue and collaboration between the West and the East in the welfare of elephants in captivity. There's a lot that we can learn from zoos. A lot of research has been done in the zoos here on reproductive biology, maybe on animal psychology, on elephant psychology. We can learn from that. There's also a lot that the East has to offer, because these traditional mahouts, they have these long traditions, some of which may be good and some of them may be bad. So you can discard the bad ones and perhaps retain the good ones. At the same time, I again make a humble plea that zoos have to get engaged in wild and captive elephant conservation in the range states. You are in a unique situation where you are in a position to be able to raise resources. And even modest amounts of resources from Western zoos can go a long way in strengthening the hands of conservationists in Asia and in helping achieve conservation on the ground. It's not that countries like India don't have resources for doing conservation, but very often this is handled through government agencies, and it goes through its own process of how money is spent on the ground. But people like us, many other conservationists, we would like to contribute to policy. And this policy means that, sensible policy means work on the ground, developing successful models of either captive elephant management or planning for policy of wild elephants at the landscape scale. And I again make a plea to zoos to get more involved, in terms of technically and in providing financial resources to conservation efforts in the range states. I'll just end the next 2-3 minutes with a small story. When these 25 elephants I spoke about in Hassan district in Karnataka, when the cases, there is a case in court that's being heard in the Karnataka High Court. The High Court appointed an expert group or a task force, and I had the privilege of being the chairman of the task force appointed by the Chief Justice, to look at not only the issue of capture of these elephants, but look at broader conservation issues of the elephant in Karnataka, across whole of Karnataka. So this report was submitted in September 2012 to the High Court. The High Court then referred the matter to the state government, to the central government, but governments take their own time to respond. They did not do anything. But then, exactly last month, this is from a newspaper, June 24th, 2013, okay, just a little over a month ago. Elephants came right up to the doorsteps of Bangalore. Bangalore is the information technology capital of Asia. If you were to make an airline booking or you want some information on your credit card, you make a phone call, somebody will answer at the other end saying, I'm Jim so-and-so. That Jim is, it could be a Sukumar sitting in Bangalore, or somebody, my namesake sitting in Bangalore and answering your phone call. Yes, but then if you had wild elephants, they were not worried about the plight of farmers in Hassan district. But when these elephants came right up to the, to the high-tech city and killed 4 people within a few days, then everybody woke up, and the media then started asking the government, what have you done about the Elephant Task Force report? The High Court has appointed an expert group. What have you done about it? So then the Chief Minister and the Cabinet hurriedly convened a meeting, and they of course said yes. They said not to Elephant Task Force recommendations. They said no to one aspect of our report about, there is this wonderful festivity I am proud of. In Mysore, you have the Dasara festival, which has been celebrated for 500 years. And you have these wonderfully caparisoned elephants that take a procession across Mysore city. It happens in September or October every year. This elephant is made to carry a golden howdah. And the golden howdah weighs 750 kilos. So we said that Karnataka can send out a very strong signal to the international conservation community that we are committed to the welfare of elephants in the wild and in captivity. We'll do a lightweight replica of this golden howdah so that it doesn't have to carry this heavy burden. Or we'll place the golden howdah in a carriage and let the elephant draw the carriage. We have to reinvent this. After all, we are the ones who invented the golden howdah a few hundred years ago. We can reinvent this. But I think the government didn't want to tinker with local sentiments and so on. But let's see what the High Court says. The final judgment is yet to come from the High Court as to what they'll see. Because our recommendation on this is that the golden howdah is replaced with a lighter replica, or the howdah is put in a carriage and drawn. So that it will be a very powerful signal. Karnataka can be a world leader in not only conservation of wild elephants, but also captive elephants. And we provided a very sensible framework, planning at the landscape scale for wild elephant conservation and measures for looking at the welfare of elephants in captivity. The day I left India for the United States, it's almost 20 days earlier. Now I picked up a newspaper in the flight as I left Bangalore onto Frankfurt before I came on to Chicago. And I opened the newspaper, and the previous day the case had been heard. It says, High Court permits capture of elephant sucklage food. This is July 10th, 2013. Okay, just less than 20 days ago. So the High Court has actually permitted the capture of one bull elephant that is causing a lot of problems. And right now, as we speak, on Monday, that is, India is about 10.5 hours ahead of here. The case is again being heard, and we are hoping that a favorable judgment from the court for a balanced approach to elephant conservation, not an ivory tower approach to elephant conservation, I think can do a lot of good for the elephants, for the livelihoods of people, for getting local support for the conservation of elephants in the long term. We want the Asian elephant to survive, not just today or tomorrow, but 100 years from now and 1,000 years from now. And that's what we are hoping for. So, we want sensible conservation and not ivory tower conservation. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thanks to St. Louis Zoo for inviting me to do this lecture. And I would be happy to answer any questions from the audience. Yes, please, yeah.
You were giving some of the factors for the diminishing population of the wild elephants, but I was also wondering why you did not include war. And I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War, and when they were
Right.
Agent Orange.
Right.
Did that affect them?
Absolutely, it did. In fact, I mentioned it very briefly. I mentioned the word war maybe just once. And I worked in Vietnam in 2001. So I mentioned there was great hunger because of all the wars in Southeast Asia, especially Cambodia, Vietnam. And the people had to go and hunt whatever they could. And therefore, one of the reasons why the elephant declined in Vietnam was that. And I worked there more than 10 years ago. So war is certainly one of the factors. Yes, please.
In the areas where there's bulls or elephants that are found with high testosterone levels, are there enough areas where they can relocate them?
Yeah, see, relocation is an issue that comes up, I mentioned the capture part of it. I did not really elaborate on the relocation part of it. I think you have to assess each situation. Because if an elephant has come out fairly recently, and you take a quick decision to capture this elephant and then relocate it, don't put it back exactly where it came from, because then there's a good chance it might go back. When many relocations have failed, either of solitary bulls or of entire family groups that have been relocated in Sri Lanka, for instance, these elephants tend to go back. You might have to take them and put them fairly far away, but then you have to look at the genetics of the other population and so on and so forth. But then what is happening today is that if the decision making gets delayed, like it has happened in Hassan, it's 10 years now. In Jawadi Hills, it's been 25 years now. There are elephants, these elephants are now completely used to a different habitat. They're used to a completely different lifestyle. Now, I'm used to eating traditional Indian food. Idli and dosa, I don't know if you heard of this. I would be quite content with going to an Indian restaurant and having that food. But my children, if there is a McDonald's or there is a KFC in Bangalore, they would like to go there once in a while, or they would eat pasta, or they would eat something very different. Now these elephants, there are elephants that are being born completely outside the forest area. And these elephants, all that they know is they know the paddy field and the millets, and they know the jackfruit and the banana and all of that. Now these elephants are never going to be able to survive if you take them back and put them back into the forest. So these are challenges. So we are going to tell the government, we are telling the government, take a quick decision. Let's have a framework. These are areas where we talk about, in our report, we talk about conservation zones. So 90% of Karnataka's elephants can be found in these conservation zones, where you have intact forest, you have fairly large forests, you have national parks, you have sanctuaries, yes. The other end of the scale, you have what we have called elephant removal zones. 0.5%, 1% of Karnataka's elephants are in these elephant removal zones because there is no real habitat, natural habitat left for them. They're causing too much distress to local people. So they have to go out from there. So you are not compromising on the conservation of the wild elephant because our elephant population can increase at the rate of 2% per year. So if you go to capture a very small number, which may be 0.5%, it's not going to compromise. Our wild populations will still be intact. So then you have to keep them in captivity. So in such situations where elephants have been out for 10 years or 20 years or whatever, I don't think relocation will work. Yes, please.
Did you indicate that more male Asian elephants should be born without tusks?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah, I think the question was why is it that Asian elephants are being born without tusks? You know, I think historically, there are different processes operating. I think historically the kings have captured elephants for use in the armies, and they wanted the tusked elephant because a tusked elephant looks more formidable to an enemy, to an opponent. And therefore, the gene for tusks has gradually been sort of whittled down, you know, in the population. And then you also had maybe hunting for ivory on a small scale, you know, in the past. So that's also perhaps helped reduce the frequency of the tusk gene in the population. So if you go to Northeast India, if you go to Burma, if you go to this particular region, you will find that maybe 50–60% of the males do not have tusks today. So this is because of this historical process. Yes, please.
What other animals that Asian elephants in the wild are scared of? Are they?
What animals are Asian elephants in the wild scared of? Well, they certainly are scared of tigers. But you know, the whole family structure has evolved to protect the young calves. You know, when you have a tiger or they get a scent of a leopard or whatever, they will all bunch together. The calves will sort of go between the legs of the elephant. But occasionally we find that the a few calves are sometimes taken by a tiger once in a while. It's not very common, but it does happen. So the tiger is the only other predator of wild elephants. But they can take only young animals. They can't take big animals. Only 2 or 3 year old maximum, not more than that. Yes, please. Could the tusks be trimmed in an effort to try to prevent poaching? Now, the first thing is that to trim the tusks of a wild elephant, you have to go and capture the elephant. That's quite an involved operation, and an elephant may die in the process. There's a 1 in 10 chance. It's probably somewhere between a 5 and 10% chance the elephant will die. You can only cut half the tusks because you have the pulp cavity with the blood vessels and the nerves going in, so you can only cut it partly. So there's still enough tusk left outside. The third thing is that tusks grow throughout the life of an elephant. So the tusks will continue to grow. So how many times you capture a single elephant? And sometimes what poachers might do is that, as people did it with the rhino in Africa where the rhinos were dehorned, the poachers said, okay, these guys are dehorning the rhino, so out of vengeance, let's just go and kill the rhino. It doesn't matter. So that could also happen. So it's not a practical solution. I think good enforcement of the law, patrolling the forest, making sure that poachers don't get the elephants. And the last 10 years, actually, poaching has declined substantially in India. There's not much poaching of tuskers in India. Same time, getting intelligence about who the main people are. The people who patronize the poachers are somebody sitting in a city. So you have to get them rather than just a local guy, you know, who's a poor villager who wants to get a pair of tusks for a few dollars or whatever. So that's actually in India, the anti-poaching efforts in the last 15 to 20 years, I would say, has worked pretty well. Yes, please. Disease is could be a problem. Very little is really known about it because the documentation of diseases in wild elephants is, you know, very, very sparse. We know that elephants get tuberculosis. We know that elephants suffer from a range of intestinal parasites and diseases. We do not know if herpes virus kills elephants in the wild. We know that they do that in captivity. But so far, there are no indications that Diseases can really cause, anthrax has been known to break out occasionally in the past in a few places in the northeast, but there's no indication that diseases can decimate elephant populations so far. And even during periods of drought, even though I showed you all those images of the elephants with all the bones showing and all that, they seem to come out pretty well. The mortality rate increases, but nothing unusual, nothing very unusual. So the elephant population elephants seem quite resilient to these cycles and so on.
What's being done to keep the elephants in captivity well nourished?
Yeah, that's the challenge. I wish a lot of people who are concerned about the welfare of animals could really actually more constructively and more proactively get involved in these kinds of issues. Because elephants are kept under different situations, as I told you, that some elephants are kept by the government in these forest camps and they're doing reasonably well. Elephants are kept in temples and maybe the temple has enough money and they're doing quite well. But sometimes you have elephants owned by individuals and they are begging or whatever. See, India has good laws, but enforcement of the law, to ensure that the elephant is doing well is it's a challenge, it's very difficult. And if an elephant is not doing well, the government has the powers to confiscate that elephant. But then you confiscate the elephant, and where do you keep the elephant? What do you do with the elephant? So I would really urge, people who are into animal welfare to constructively try and see that the welfare of elephants improve.
You mentioned something about the mahouts, the art that is going away. Is there some kind of a program or something where people are learning that and trying to?
We are just starting it. In fact, Linda of Asian Elephant Support has just given us a small grant for us to start documenting some of the traditional knowledge just earlier this year. So I really think that this has to be done across Asia before the art completely disappears. In Burma, it has to be done. It has to be done in Assam, in Karnataka, some of these places where it's very important to document this knowledge. Okay, I'll come to that. See, when we say they're not doing so well, when you look at an elephant, it looks like the elephant is a bit emaciated. But let me tell you, those elephants are reproducing very well. They are surviving very well. They are fine. They are fine. Now, to be able to bolster the nutrition of elephants in the national park is an impossible task. You really can't do anything about it. If you do that, they do even better. There'll be even more elephants. And there'll be more elephants coming out. So I think you should my approach is that you have a situation where you have a critical, supposing you have a critical situation, you have Vietnam. Kathian National Park has just few elephants left. You need to ensure that all these elephants survive, they reproduce, they increase in number from 10 or whatever to 150 or 100 elephants. Only then, these populations are viable. On the other hand, the landscapes I showed you, we have 8,000 elephants. In Sri Lanka, you have 6,000 elephants across, 40% of the island. So these populations are doing very well. So we should let nature take its own course. Even if out of 8,000 elephants, you have a big drought, you have 500 elephants that die. I would not be concerned. It's nature's way of, ensuring the survival of the fittest. And these populations, let me tell you, they are viable populations. So there's no issue with that. As long as we are able to keep the habitat. That's why I spoke about landscapes. Look at landscapes, map landscapes, see where the corridors are, make sure that there is a legal framework to prevent the corridors being snapped. You don't have mining coming up, within a corridor, or you don't have some industrial development or a factory coming right next to a corridor. So these are the kinds of things that we are trying to push for in terms of the policy. Elephants are able to move through the landscape, and you have a few thousand elephants or a few hundred elephants. They are fine. Just leave them alone. Yes, please.
You mentioned when you were looking at those graphs and that India and Sri Lanka or the Asian elephant was increasing in those other areas like Cambodia, Vietnam, and the other two were decreasing. The question is, do you have any communication or collaboration with ecologists in any of these other countries that you share your knowledge to work collectively to do anything in these other areas?
Okay, let me answer that in two parts. And the first is that, yes, personally, I was involved in the 1990s in a much more major way before I went more into academics, and then I got involved much more with India. But I'm now trying to reach out to these other countries also. But we have worked in Burma, we have worked in Cambodia, we have worked in Vietnam to some extent. In Sri Lanka, we have an engagement. So, and we also have the IUCN, Elephant Specialist Group. We have a number of other conservation organizations that are working. So, I think it's important to bring, the thing about conservation is that different people have different ideas about how you save elephants, either in the wild or in captivity. So, I would like to work with people who are balanced, realistic, pragmatic. Of course, keeping the best interests of the elephants in mind, but at the same time ensuring that people do not suffer. So we do have a good network, in the Southeast Asian countries.
What's the main factor in the large population or larger population of the African elephant compared to the Asian? Is it mainly habitat loss?
Right. Yeah, it is. Asian elephants, 50,000 in 500,000 square kilometers. African elephants, 500,000 in 5 million square kilometers. So if you look across in terms of densities, abundances, exactly the same. So Africa has 10 times the range of the Asian elephant. It has 10 times the numbers of elephants. Yeah, just a straight relationship. Although the elephant is being hammered today in Central Africa, in East Africa to a certain extent. I have also been part of CITES and a program called MIKE, monitoring the illegal killing of elephants. The last 3 or 4 years, there have been, again, disturbing trends in Africa in terms of the ivory poaching. Okay. So thank you once again. Thank you.